Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody, to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast. I'm Paul and I'm here with Tania. And today we're joined by Deb.
How you going, Paul? Nice to see you and Tania.
G'day.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Deb. I've listened to your podcast, your and Min's podcasts. I've listened to lots of them and I've been on your podcast, which was really exciting. And it's great to have you here today. And we're talking about all things SDA, kind of a basic introduction to our audience who aren't across SDA, like I suppose your audience is, as to what is this SDA thing? Should providers consider moving into that space? And what are the basics they need to know before they kind of decide to enter into yet another world of acronyms, another world of processes, another level of government regulation, really?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm excited to be here and to talk about it, for sure. That's what we do every day. So, kind of to begin with it.
Do you want to give us a little bit of a background about your journey through NDIS and also for NDIS Property Australia, what it is you guys actually do?
Yeah. Okay. So, my journey really started about 3 years ago. So early in the COVID days when I was living overseas running a tour company, which had been very rudely shut down by COVID. And Min came to me. I'd worked for Min about 17 years ago. And we were, he had a financial planning business here in Brisbane that I was his office manager for. So we'd kept in touch during that time and he contacted me and said, Deb, I'm starting up a new business in property, but sort of specialising. And I sort of thought you might be interested to come on board if you're not doing anything else and help me kind of start things up. I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely not doing anything else at the moment. So that's basically where we started, building the website, learning ourselves all about SDA from a property perspective, from selling it as an investment. So, almost 3 years later, we're going to celebrate our 3rd year anniversary next month. No, sorry, this month. It's the 1st of June.
This month.
And we have now 16 people in our team. So we've had a very rapid growth and learned a hell of a lot along the way about SDA, and not just about SDA, sort of pretty much everything NDIS property, if you like.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So there are so many acronyms. I often get jumbled around with them all. But obviously, what is SDA and why would someone think about becoming an SDA investor or provider? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so SDA is Specialist Disability Accommodation, which basically is very high-spec property that has been designed for a small number of NDIS participants. So estimated about 6% of all NDIS participants Australia-wide will need to live in an SDA home. And because they're expensive to build, the government doesn't want to try and do this on their own. They have decided to incentivise private investment into building SDA by offering much higher than standard rents by way of the SDA funding that goes into a participant's plan.
Yeah, cool.
So that's basically what it is and why somebody would want to become an investor, because of the returns.
Mm. And I understand that there's different people who are involved in this process. So we have an SDA investor and we have an SDA provider and we have a builder and then we have SIL providers. There's lots of different stakeholders. What is the difference between the SDA provider, the SDA investor, and the builder or the developer? and the difference between the SIL provider. How do these guys work together, and what is this? It seems like a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people involved. What are their roles?
Yeah, sure. Really good question. There are a lot of people involved, and there's more than you've just mentioned. You also need to take into account the building designers and architects, the SDA assessors, as well, play very big roles in the designing and the developing of SDA. So you start with the builders and developers who decide that they want to build this, and they don't need to be specialists in SDA. They just need to make sure they're following the building guidelines that the NDIA put out. And that's where the building designers or the architects come in. And you really want to be involving people who've got experience in designing specialist disability accommodation, because it is so specific. So it kind of starts with that side of thing. You've got your architects, your builders. They come together, they make a plan, they find suitable property to build it on, whether it's going to be a standalone house or a set of villas, or whether it's going to be a larger complex, a high-rise apartment complex. And then a lot of the time they will want to get funding to build that. So then they will start looking for investors.
Mm-hmm.
Where a provider fits into this is that once the property is finished, it can't be tenanted without a provider. The SDA provider is an NDIS registered provider for specialist disability accommodation. So they will actually hold the head lease with the investor, with the owner of the property, and then they lease the property to the individual tenant or tenants. So they're kind of like the go-between. They're the property manager, they're the rental manager, and they're also the liaison with the NDIS, and they collect the rents, the funding that comes in, that is then sent to the investor. So, yeah. And then the SIL providers, they come in at the end because they're the ones that are either going to have the clients with SDA funding that need to move into these properties. So they work very closely with the SDA provider.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also usually the organisation that is actually looking after the care into the tenants. So the SDA provider will generally work with either one care organisation, one SIL organisation who will tenant a property from their own clients, or they'll find one tenant if it's a multi-tenant property, and they will then, what we call the anchor tenant, and find other tenants who can compatibly live in that same property. If it's a single tenant property, it's obviously a bit easier, but you need to have all of those people involved early on. So when I say the property's finished, then the SDA provider is involved. They should be involved a lot earlier, because part of the trick is knowing what to build where, and it's the providers that really have more of an intel on that and what the participants need in that house. So there are basic guidelines, but there's also something called fit for purpose. You need to build the property fit for the people who are going to be living in it.
Yeah, oh man, there's a lot of moving parts, obviously.
Yes.
Providers, I guess the providers are the ones sort of hands-on dealing with the participants and so know what's available. I guess, how does your business fit into it? Who are your primary clients?
Our primary clients are the investors. The property investors, generally sophisticated investors. They can be mum and dad investors. They can be funds. So we have clients that fit from one end to the other end of that spectrum, whether they're looking just for a single property or to build a portfolio of a few, or whether they're a fund looking to buy en masse, one line of, say, 10 units in one complex, or to build a larger portfolio of, 50, 100 properties around Australia or more. So those are our main clients. We're a real estate agency, because we sell property, but we only do NDIS. So we make our money from the builder giving us a commission to sell it to the investors. That's how we work. But we do so much more. We're an advisor and a consultant to our clients who need to be connected with the builder, with the provider, with everybody along the way, so that they can find the right property for them that is going to be a viable property that will get good tenants, that will give them a good income. So they need to have that assistance the whole way through. This is very different from a regular residential property investment.
Yeah, absolutely. So how would an investor get started? How do you help in that space?
So we will speak to them about their finances, what they're looking to achieve. And firstly, we would need to know that they financially qualify, because it is a more expensive property investment than a regular one. And lending is harder. There are a lot of more moving parts to this. Valuations are different. So we need to know that they're going to be able to come up with the deposit for something like this at the front, and also have a higher risk profile that they will be able to allow for vacancy in tenancy, which is an absolute fact of investing in this kind of thing, that you're not guaranteed to get tenants. You're not guaranteed to get tenants straight off. It's a slow moving process.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's what we do. We qualify them. We educate them. A lot of what we do is about educating what it's about, how it works, and whether it's for a particular investor. And if they decide it is, then we work with them to find the location that would be right for them, depending on what they're looking to get out of it. And it's obviously got good demand, and it's going to be a viable investment for them and provide a home for people who really need it.
And so there's so much to unpack there, but I think the big question that I have from listening to all of this so far is there's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of money involved from what you've just said. There's no guarantee that they're going to get a participant. Now, we probably don't have time today to unpack all things like the design standards and all of the variables, but there's so many variables. So I guess the value add of your service is all of this. So an investor can come to you and say, right, this is how much money I'm looking to spend. This is the type of return that I'm looking for. Help guide me in what category and what location, what builder. Do you also connect them with the SDA providers?
Absolutely.
And the building assessors?
Yeah. The building assessor is really done by the builder because when they put together an SDA plan, before it goes for DA, it has to have pre-assessment as SDA compliant. So there's two stages. It's pre-construction and then post-construction. The assessor goes back in, ticks all the boxes, and then gives it its certificate of SDA compliance. So that's nothing really to do with the investor. In their contract will be the fact that they are buying an SDA compliant property, and the builder has to deliver that. So as far as the investor's concerned, really they need to just be obviously dealing with the builder, and we help them there in terms of, the whole contract, different stages of the contract. So we're with them all the way through that. And at the end, they are with the provider. But we will put them in contact with providers that we recommend in the area early on in the process, as early on as possible, so that they can, firstly, they might go to the provider just to get the data, to find out if the provider is comfortable of that area. They believe that they're going to be able to get tenants. And so it's a very collaborative process there even. And when everyone's happy and the build starts, then that's when the provider will actually start looking for tenants, starting that procurement process.
Yeah. And so what kind of timeframes are we talking about? Because it seems like I've listened to your podcast around participants not always having funding in the first instance and having to reapply or go through the process of getting other funding, and that taking a year. I know as an NDIS auditor that the NDIS audit process from the commission side of things takes at least a year to be a registered SDA provider. I know there's a separate process for enrolling the dwelling through the NGIA, which requires the assessment to be done by the building assessor at the certain categories to be done. That process takes time. Did these all happen parallel? Are we talking a year, or are we talking many years because of all of the variables?
I guess the biggest variable is going to be the build time. Yeah. And it does vary from state to state, from builder to builder. But the variables you're going to be dealing with over and above a regular house construction will be the initial assessment and getting that ready to go in for your DA or your BA. Then your build time, which amongst our builders, varies from anywhere from about 5 months up to almost a year, almost 12 months actual build time. Then the SDA assessment, all going well, if they get it first off, is great. That won't take long. The actual enrolling it with the NDIA, I believe, is about a month.
Okay.
So that's the building side of things with the participant. And this is why we encourage our investors to engage a provider, an SDA provider, as early on as possible, because there might not be any participants in the area with the right level of funding. They need to go through that application process still. And that best case scenario, probably 6 months to get their SDA funding. And it can take a year. It might not be the right level of funding that they want, that they've requested, that they need. So then it goes back in for review. If that still doesn't give them the result they want, it can go to the AAT. So it can easily be an 18-month, 2-year or more process.
Yeah, wow.
So yeah, it's really complex on so many different levels.
Yeah. It's certainly not something that I would want to fumble my way through. You could just make so many mistakes at every turn that it could end up being incredibly expensive and even blow those timeframes completely out of the water.
Yeah. So we have different terminology, if you like, for our property types in terms of whether they are provider-led or participant-led or builder-led, just meaning whether the builder has just come to us with a package that they believe is in a good location, fantastic. But what we like to sell, I think the best option for everybody is what we call provider-led. So this is where the builder is working with a provider already, and they've worked together. It's in a good location. It's the type of house that the provider or the type of dwelling that the provider believes has demand in the area. So then they will come to us to find a buyer for it. So it doesn't mean that the tenants are guaranteed, but the provider has confidence that they will be able to source tenants, and they may already have those tenants going through the funding process. Participant-led theoretically sounds like it will be the best, because that's basically where you've got participants already identified, waiting to go. But then you rely on the build time, which has all those variables that we mentioned. And if it's a shorter build time and the whole process happens within 8-10 months, fantastic. If they're already SDA funded and they're able to wait for that time, that's great. But it can take longer. It can take 18 months. It can take 2 years, especially up here in Queensland. We had such bad delays over the last 2 years with building industry that, we have had a lot of projects were just literally stalled for a year. Nothing happened on them. And those participants that were lined up for that property found somewhere else to go and they're gone. So participant-led doesn't necessarily mean it is a guarantee either.
Yeah. Is there often times when a SIL provider, the people who are providing the service in the house, are also the SDA provider?
Yes, that often happens.
Yep.
The NDIA, I know, have a little bit of a concern on that, believing it's a bit of a conflict of interest. And from my understanding, is they want to kind of move away from that model and really keep the support of the bricks and mortar and the supports completely separate. Yeah. But a lot of organisations do both.
The conflict is that a participant has to have choice and control. So if they're in the home, they should be able to choose a different SIL provider than the SDA provider. So as long as that is transparent and they know that they're both, they just need to be given the choice at every service agreement every 12 months to choose a different SIL provider. And the participant can. It gets really complicated though, because you might have 2 or 3 participants in a home, and under choice and control, they could all choose a different SIL provider. That's not going to logistically work because of the costs involved in that, but that is their choice. And so then when you've got 3 people in a house, you need to come to an agreement about what the SIL provider, who the SIL provider is going to be. And then you've got the extra complications of if they all love a specific support worker and that support worker changes businesses of who they work with, it's their choice. If they want to stay with that support worker, they should have the choice. So there's lots of conflicts that can happen. So it is simpler if you have SDA and SIL separate, because then the SDA the SDA provider has the agreement, the tenancy agreement with the still participant or with the participant, but then the supports could change. And the supports can change as well. And I understand that SDA providers will have agreements in place with SIL providers for a fixed period of time and then cycle through them to make sure that there is a good level of care, that there's transparency over the supports being provided, rather than lock in for 5 years with the same SIL provider and not really know if they're doing a good job, and then that impacting the participants and them wanting to leave that home. There's many angles, I guess, that you can look at it through.
Absolutely. And this is, I guess, the concern of a lot of investors, because we do explain these kind of issues to them. And it's what makes it such a difficult area to get into as an investor. You really do have to be willing to take periods of vacancy in your house, because you just never know. And the only way really to future-proof it as much as possible is to build for as little tenants as possible, so single tenancy or maximum 2-tenant properties, and to future-proof it in terms of your inclusions in the property. So it is better than anyone else's in the area, and your tenants aren't going to want to leave because they've got all the bells and whistles and all the extras they can possibly want, because at least then they'll want to stay in that house, because having the support side of it is so complex.
Yeah.
And that can change everything.
I've had quite a few clients, I don't know actually where they ended up, but when I had audited them as a provider early on before they had done a build, going through the audit process where they were the parents of children or even adults with disability, and they were going to be the provider and then get a bank loan to be the investor. So I guess they're wearing both hats. And then I guess that's participant-led. I guess in that scenario, it seems more secure that they know that person is going to want to live in the house.
Absolutely.
And are there people that use things like family trusts to do those kind of arrangements for succession planning? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we call it owner-occupier, SDA purchase. So that's exactly what it is. So, yeah, that's the best case scenario, and we love to see that. Unfortunately, so many SDA-funded participants just don't have the family that have the means to do that, or anyone in their, close circle that would have the means to actually invest for them on their behalf. So it's a shame, because that is an ideal situation.
Yeah.
That's cool. Hey, look, I'll be honest, that's really cleared up a lot of the questions I had around SDA, because it from the outside, it does seem a bit foggy, and I'm really hoping our listeners have got a lot out of it as well. Look, how can people get in touch with you if they're interested in, becoming an investor provider, or just getting some more information about how you guys operate?
Yeah, absolutely. So easiest way to contact us is info@ndis.property. Or our phone number is 1300 254 397.
Fantastic. We'll drop that in the show notes as well, so that if anybody is listening, just check out those comments below, and you'll be able to get a hold of all that information.
Yeah, we'd be more than happy to talk to anyone. Any questions, where that's what we love to do, is advise and help out. And doesn't matter if you're an investor, if you're a provider, whatever you're looking at doing in the field. We
And you're very active in the space. You do many things. You sponsor the SDA conferences and you speak at the SDA conferences. You also have many ebooks on your website that can be downloaded, and you run amazing network events as well. So there's lots of opportunities for people looking at this space to connect to you, come along, see what it's about, and really this education piece that you do so well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's we love doing that. We love talking to people. We love to spread awareness about SDA and what it really is, because it's such a new and very, very niche area. And it's just, as you said, it's just not understood.
Yeah, so complicated.
Indeed. Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope that has sort of triggered a few little light bulbs in people's minds as to what can potentially be done in the SDA field. And love to speak to anyone
who
wants to chat more.
Oh, that's brilliant. Look, thank you so much. that's where we're going to leave off today's podcast. But if you're listening, please join us next week because we're going to be talking, Tania and I, we're going to have a bit of a conversation. How big should I get as a provider? What's too big? What's manageable? And we're going to talk about growth, strategy, and all those pitfalls to avoid when you're actually trying to grow your provider business. So we will be here again next week. But thank you so much, Deb, for joining us today. It was fantastic.
You're welcome. It's been great. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.